That's cheating. Okay, so these poems are named after the numbers of pies. You'll recognize them. So this is called 3.14. And of course the 3 corresponds to the third word, 1 to the first, 4 to the... You'll hear the patterns pretty quickly. 3.14. Left my me. Simple little poem, right? Okay, pi. Let's see what else you got. 159. My sad study suffering and sad. All right. This one, the title means a lot to me. It will probably mean a lot to you. 3589793238462. Right. Left sad. Academic study, gloomy study. Left suffering. Left academic me and suffering. I'll do one more from this. It's poetic because it's sad, right? This one is called 279502, but you probably knew that already. Suffering, gloomy, study sad, and suffering. There we go. Kind of a cheap trick, but it's fun. Just stupid enough, right? So up here, you'll be seeing some of my visual poetry. Visual poetry, for those who don't know about it, it just means making art, like visual art, out of letters. Yes? What is plunderverse? I'm going to be doing a chunk on plunderverse because this book is a plunderverse project. Plunderverse means, like, at a basic level, creative plagiarism. So all of your other professors are going to tell you, don't plagiarize. You come to my class and we say, well, there's a space for it. And we'll get into why. And I'll try not to get into too much trouble while we do. Thank you, though. Good question. Okay, this poem is called Cleanup. I have kids, and when you have kids, you have dinosaurs in your life. There's a website that shows where all the dinosaur bones have been found in Canada. Very cool website, and we found out that there were mastodon, like the fake elephants. They were found very close to our house, so this is a poem about the elephants of Canada. I started fantasizing about when the elephants come back, what life will look like when the elephants come back. The way the forest sounds sneak into the grocery store. The shopping cart creaks like mountains. I have seen mountain goats scale Campbell soup cans as if they were butter, aisle 12. Through those aisles we move in murmurations, enacting strange Pac-Man patterns of consumption, holding coupons up against the ghostly creep, the spilt cherries that magically disappear, the floor unstained. The way the vitamin stacks whisper hypnotically, the freezers murmur anonymously, while these persistent birds overhead click and chirp like cameras, only ever keep one eye on you, its other eye seeing through the security guard to the nightless blue sky through the neon sign. I think I will root for truffles tonight. I am no hero. I am skinny dipping in a sea of potato chips, swaying like kelp past cookies and creosote cleaner, peanut butter tubs you could bathe in. When the elephants come back to Canada, we will hear their thunderous stomp on the roofs of stores like these, stuff our shirts with water bottles, strap Quebecois cheeses to our thin chests, praise the lake waters come rushing in. Their trunks will come crashing through, grasping their ablation, collecting us or shopping carts or the salmonella that have miraculously returned to these waters. The mountain goats, though, stay prophetically dry, climb or rather float up those coarse living highways of elephant trunks, tablets returning to the mount, over drifting ice cream, soy milk bars, and burning high times. This is how we will all die, knowing that only our vitamin dreams will survive. What did I do with this thing? I was trying to be slick. There we go. Okay, this poem is called Black Hole. From nothing, a bird watches a man walk into a room. From nothing, a woman is telling a story. There is a murder. She stops speaking. He sits down. A woman walks into the room. A bird flies into the room. The bird is black. The man is black. The woman sits down. The crow is telling a story. It walks into the center of a circle. Everybody stops talking. The wings of the woman fold behind her back. She is wearing jeans with holes that resemble black holes or night. Two crows fly out in the shape of a butterfly or a depressed penis or a man picking up a stone. Nothing is said. The man throws the stone and it kills him. The crow hovers over the body. The woman stands up and walks out of the room. Her wings unfold and she begins telling a story. Outside of the room is the room full of men and women and birds listening to her story. A woman knocks over a glass of black ink. It is now nighttime. Nobody continues to talk about the murder. Crows fly through the sky above you. They are women, black women. They plot themselves. The man advances to inspect the hole where the crows fly into the room. He advances his hand into the night and is bitten. The woman pushes him and together they fall. A stone flies past them, knocking two birds out of the sky. As they fall, their feathers peel from their wings. Their feathers are black. You can only imagine how they float in the open space of night, beside the black hole from which they came, falling onto the stone face of silence. The man sits down and stops talking. A woman walks into the room like a hole in a conversation. Silence breaks. There is a wire that loops around the room. It is listening for any sign of silence. Imperceptibly, it connects everything in the room to everything else in the room. The wire is black and casts a long shadow over everything it touches in the room, which is everything. Nothing stirs in the shadows. It might be the source of blackness. It might have caused the hole, or it connects one hole to another hole. The holes are lonely, long for another moment in the perfect quiet. From nothing, the birds that perch on this dark wire tell stories to the people. Each word another thread that ties them to the room. The room itself is reeling from the murder. Thank you. No, not yet. Sorry, we'll stay here. So I moved to Niagara Falls area in Ontario, which is a really weird part of the country, very strange, very beautiful. The falls themselves are remarkable, but one of the things that was very unsettling was to learn that every year over the falls, hundreds of bodies fall over it. And those are, there's an inordinate number of suicides, but there's also mob killings from both sides of the border, and that's one of the ways that they dispose of the bodies. And it's just normal. Like, nobody really talks about it, and it became this thing that I had to wrestle with as I tried to understand where in the world I was. So this is a poem that responds to that. It's called There is a River. This is a body in the river, touching to air below the surface of water. This is the river's current hitting the limbs, turning into slow motion acrobatics. These are stars above dancing electrons. Arms move the swinging planets, dot the measured tempo of orbits, swoop the water with arpeggios and areas and asteroids. This left arm curls from its apogee under the chest. This chest rolls like a moon distracted by a looming nebula. These legs fold in a gesture of almost exuberance. Their hair trails in jellyfish lines. Then here, the body pivots and chases the hair like a dashing zodiacal squid. Here, the skin is calm. Here, porous. Here, the water lures the body as if calling it into a dance. Here, the water seeps into the cells of the body, becoming one with it. Porous as the letter O opened into the letter U. I see a body accelerating, as if moving with the current, working towards a crescendo. On its side, the body's dissonant speed crashing against stone cymbals. On this side, the clothing torn into harmony. Look, the body is leaking, releasing. Look, the bones are breaking steady from the hits, becoming a dust inside. It looks like blood and water mixed with the bones, life become elixir, an ambrosial drink of verve. This drink is a gift to all that still wants to live in the water. This is a body's blood. It tapers after like an effulgent scarf reaching towards an ancestral moon. This is blood, a story of a body in a river, unseen creatures already moving in. Lisa noticed the body first on Facebook, stemming from a feeling of it, feeling of absence. Kevin felt it too, commented. Judith shared it on Discord, feeling conflicted. Jeremy tweeted it, feeling the feeling, adding in a line from a book he might have misremembered. Siobhan, Amy, and Paul retweeted it, unsure. When Bill texted Hazel, she had a feeling, but Lori and Janet didn't respond. Aisha sent an emoticon that Tanis liked. When Russell posted it on Instagram, Google noticed the feeling and flagged it for Google+, suggesting to Marley that she might have feelings about this too, but she was only on Pinterest that day. Twitter, monitoring, sent an email notification to Robert, Eric, and Margaret, one of whom still had an effective auto-response messages turned on, which spun into a maelstrom of digital noise as the two machines sorted out the ones versus the zeros. The body spun up to the top of 1,000 feeds, collecting likes and shares like tiny air bubbles, pushing it to the surface, to air. To some, it was sad. To some, it was wow. Some sent love or hugs or something they called condolences, which was somewhere in between. Feeling desperate, Zoria called Alina, but didn't connect. Christian blocked Ryan, who was pushing it too far, moved over to Blue Sky. Jim, Carmine, and Michael flew up into a group Zoom that crashed. Corrine, Jay, and Derek spun up a new chat thread on WhatsApp that Anita tried to join, but her battery died. Dennis, using a Norm de Plume, couldn't think of a witty retort, logged off, but never stopped following the body. The absence spread to the news. The body fell into a whirl of syndication, popping up beside stories of the government, the weather, the fall from grace. Still, it had not been seen by Amanda, noted by Ronald, engaged with by Jacqueline, or even viewed by Bart, who were illuminated by the presence of a different body in a different stream. Still, it had not been read by Faisal, Nadia, or Jackie. Still, the body slipped ever further into the archive, the alerts shifting into other pulses from the algorithms, ever pressing into striations of individualized neuroses and need. It never made it to Snapchat or Reddit or 8chan, and nobody was doxxed by the incelibate. What might have been diffused into pockets of difference, spun into dark webs of pure sheen, the darkest chambers of each reflected back from a deadly spreading pond. Beneath it, the body drifts. Beneath it, a feeling persists. There you go. So that's Niagara. Now I get to respond to your question. What is Plunderverse? It's a mess up here. Okay. Subtly. Here we are. So, you've read Shakespeare? You read Sonnet 150? Did you? When you did? Does anyone want to recite that? You want to recite that? Who's feeling brave? Nobody? I don't want to recite it either. Nobody? Can you do it from memory? No? Oh, from what power hath thou this powerful might? I'm not going to read it like that. So anyways, this is Sonnet 150. In the year 2009, we were commemorating, or starting to think about commemorating William Shakespeare's 400th anniversary for the sonnets. I was struck when I started thinking about it that the sonnets are changeless. They haven't been altered. And yet every era over those 400 years, people have found themselves in the sonnets. The sonnets have appealed to them. People like it. It's been a bestseller since the time he published it, right through to the present. The plays have gone up and down in popularity. The sonnets have been popular. It's interesting to think of how different we are from all those different eras throughout the past 400 years, and yet something about them is enduring. I wanted to figure out what I liked about William Shakespeare, and that meant I had to tear it apart. So I started tearing it apart, and I picked Sonnet 150 because it had the word power in it, and I wanted to feel his power, and I wanted to feel empowered. So I took this one, and I started ripping it apart. And this is the heart of Plunderverse. Plunderverse says you can carve up your sources, your influences. Don't be worried about your influences. Don't try to bury the people who influence you. Explore them. Dive deeper into them. Figure out the difference between your voice and their voice. And so my method of Plunderverse is to go in and to chop it up. What do I have here? So here's a poem from my book, The Others Raised in Me. This is number 1, and there you can see where my poem is in relation to his, and that gives you a sense of how it works. It's called Read Me Doc. What power this we in my art? Make me sigh, swear that grace is of things. In my mind, how to make and see the others raised in me. So you see, I've cut away words and letters there, but left the poem that I wanted. And that poem starts to sound like my voice, and that's what this is. So this book here, The Others Raised in Me, which takes its title from that one, is 150 poems carved out of Sonnet 150. So it's kind of a maximalist exercise. It took a long time, but it was great fun to work on, and all kinds of challenge because of the limitations of the constraint. One of the things that was an important rule to me was that I never altered the order of the letters in his. So it wasn't like Scrabble, where you're given a bunch of tiles and you can say whatever you want. This was, I had to keep the order, and the poems had to come out of there. And I was inspired, I don't want to sound too pretentious about this, but I was in Florence at the Uffizi Gallery, where they have the David, right? You know, the big dude with the small dick. He's up there and at the end of the hallway. And he was fine. I mean, he was a nice-looking man. He was fine. But I wasn't interested in him when I was there. I was blown away by the 3 sculptures on the path to the David. And what these are, they look like they're unfinished. And there are 3 sculptures that have this, you can see the stone of the marble, and they're figures who are like struggling to break out of the marble block. They're really haunting, and they have that energy, the wrestle of trying to force yourself into being. They reminded me a little bit, do you know that story about Athena? God, now I'm talking about, what am I doing? I'm going off on a tangent. And Athena stabs her father to get out of the belly. You know that story? Yeah. It felt like that, like they were struggling against the materiality of their life to come into existence. There was a quote that was with it, where he says that he doesn't carve a statue. He takes away all the material that's not the statue. And that became a real template and model for me with this plunder verse exercise. To carve away all the words and letters that aren't my voice, that aren't me buried inside of William Shakespeare. So I'm going to read a few poems from this. They're short. They're all short little poems because there's not a lot of words there, as I learned. And again, if you have any follow-up questions to, I don't know, the legality of this, the limits of plagiarism, how far I'm willing to tolerate. What do you think about ChatGPT? Not yet. It's not very good yet, but it's getting there. I'm off track again. Number 2. What is missing when this becoming thinks, exceeds, who taught me to see hidden this word? Number 3. What is power? When is strength a skill? Who taught thee how to make love? More. What is in love to be love? And of course, if you look up here, you can see some of the echoes of where that's coming from, and they're all traceable. Number 4, give to my sight every deed that others do to raise love, to be beloved. Number 5, powerful lie, grace my cause to be bed of thee. Hope you guys don't mind some more erotic stuff. It's awkward, sorry. Number 6, from tongue sight and words touch, rush tongue words madly. Number 7, oh, the more I make love, the more worthy I be. 8, a fullness, a moon reached through me. Number 9, we are not made of words, though we is. Will we ever me again? And I did have one to honor the source of the exercise. Number 30, cut from marble, I find words for David. A couple reviewers have said, what the heck's that one about? Is that about an Earl Burney poem? No, but now you know the answer. So one of the things that I did, each chapter takes its theme from a line of the original sonnet, and each chapter represents a different era between our time and his, so over the past 400 years. So I divided those up. And as you get towards the end, you get more into contemporary society, and I started thinking about the emergence of mass culture, mass spectacle, and mass sports. Are there any hockey fans here? Couple? Who do you cheer for? Pittsburgh. Is that allowed? Okay, cool. I thought that would be a unanimous. There'd be like a roar of Canadien. No, not this year. No, not this year. Okay, so this is a series of poems that embark on that theme. Number 61. We meet in arenas that fuse us into words. 62. Speak the myth. Say Mackinaw. Say holy. 63. From sport in ice, a grace that thaws immortalities. Do you remember Salt Lake City Olympics? Is that a little too long ago? Do you remember, anyone remember that? When Wayne Gretzky was the coach, and he went out to center ice right before the game, and as they were flooding the ice, he put a toonie under center ice, and it became a kind of mythological thing because Canada won the gold medal. Sidney Crosby got the goal. Everyone was going crazy. It was great fun. That toonie is now in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But anyways, you heard that story before? No? Okay, you can't say that ever again, though, can you? Yeah. Number 64. From thin ice, a loony is scratching at madness. 65. Only heroes break away. 66. Hockey is better in the nude. True story. 67. Thus Puck Bunny trusts just lust. 68. We own the game we sold. 69. Hockey fans over distance, overtime. Skip forward just a little bit here. And this is a piece written in the letters of love's name, so the letters of love in the poem. Ooh, 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 e, ooh, ooh, e, 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 ooh, oh, e, e, v, e, e, o, e, 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 o, o, e, o, l, e, v, e, o, e, o, l, o, l, e, o, e, love, o, love, beloved, Plunderverse. And I think I have time for one more project that I wanted to highlight. So I think you've looked at the suite form a little bit, yeah? So suite form is my new project, my new Shakespeare intervention. It's like a playground I keep going back to. This one, those visual poems come from this book, Foundry. And if we want to talk about visual poetry, we can talk about that afterwards. What's going on here? Yes, this. So we know the sonnets. We know how they work. I've obviously spent some time with these poems. I don't love them the way that you'd expect for a guy who's written 2 full books in response to them. I keep coming back to them, though. There's something that compels me. In this project, I was reading through the sonnets again, and I was really struck by the notion that there's actually a grid in forming the sonnets. There's 10 syllables, right? 5 feet, but 10 syllables per line, 14 lines. It's a 10 by 14 grid. So as soon as you start thinking about them as a grid, they start to feel different because you can picture columns, and you can picture rows. So instead of the poetry language of lines, rhymes, and these kind of things, you're starting to think about it in columns and rows. And one of the things that Shakespeare did that's interesting is he rearranged the sound patterns of the 10th column, right? He has his Shakespearean sonnet model, so he rearranged the pattern, which meant that he was thinking about sound patterns in the 10th column. The way my brain works is I said, okay, if he's interested in sound and he's interested in the 10th column, what's happening in the rest of the columns? Well, I found out. And that was the project. That's where suite form comes from. There's a full book version that's coming out next year called Bard Code, because there's like a secret code working through this. And in order to do that, I had to take the AB, CD, CD structure and run it through the entire sequence. So carry it on. Find out all the rhymes that he uses as rhymes. So, for instance, he rhymes brow with now. So those are both A. The ow sound becomes A. Field and held which is not a sonic rhyme for us, but it's a page rhyme, right? The ELD. Those rhymes, so there's a B. You carry that on. I was going to swear there. I did the whole fucking sonnet. It's 154 poems, 21,000 syllables. This took me 9 months, working like 4 to 6 hours a day on this project. And I had no idea where it was going. This is what it looks like in the end. You can see up on the left side here, this is the data. So you can see this poem, how I've transcribed it into the literal codes, assign a color to each of those, and you get the color grids of the text. And you can see the rhyme schemes working out. This is the first one. The suite form is the first draft of it. It's like in painting we'd call that a maquette, like a tester. I've since changed the style and the colors a little bit, so now this is what the final ones are going to look like. This one is more of a heat map, by which I mean that the darker the colors, the brighter the colors, the more frequent they are in the book. So if they fade out or are super dark, then they're less frequent. There's one rhyme in the whole book that's actually a pure black square. That's you have to read the whole book to find it, though. So this project is it's definitely a labor of love, but it's coming out from a press in the UK next year. What's interesting about it, from a deforming the sonnets kind of perspective, is that every syllable gets reduced, right? So when I'm rendering it into the code, when it just becomes N, right? Fall becomes all, because I'm going to the root rhyme. So I'll go back to this one, and I'm going to read what it sounds like from through my system here. N or I in ers al I ij I o. And ig ip en es in I u es ild. I ust ud if I so zd on au. Il ia ut erd id of al oth eld. And I ing asked al I u I eyes. Al the ur of I usti eyes. O I if in ein on ip onkenai. En al eating am and ift es eyes. Au uch or eyes I would I you is use. If au utsten is you of ein. Alamai ont and ik I would excuse. Ooing is you I uk es on you. Thank you very much. So I was asked kind of later in the game to come up with a theme for the talk and some poems. So I came up with poems for the Plunderverse, and then I was asked for a description, and I said I was going to talk about where poems come from. I haven't done that, but I've also tried to showcase a different range of where poems come from the usual sources, right? People talk about their feelings, their experience of the world, whereas I've tried to say that there's other ways to approach a poem that you can come at, and there's actually an endless limit of ways that you can approach a poem. 2 full books in response to the same sonnets, neither of which would Shakespeare recognize as poems himself. So, does anyone have any questions, or nobody threw anything at me, so that's a good start. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about being influenced by these statues, like taking away and so on, and your poetry does a bit of this taking away thing. To what extent were you influenced by the Oulipo movement, the Oulipo group in France with Perec and yeah? So just maybe talk about that.
Has anyone heard of Oulipo here? You've heard about this? You've heard of the avant-garde? Anybody? Like the Dadaists, the Surrealists, Situationists. In Quebec, the Automatistes. You've heard of the Automatistes? Paul-Émile Bordois, Claude Gauvreau, Francois Sullivan, Therese Renaud. I can't do more than that. That's pretty good though, isn't it? That's pretty good. The avant-garde groups are all trying to change the world, doing interesting things with the writing, experimenting, trying to break the habits so that we're not just repeating the same damn thing over and over again. Because if we're still writing in the same way, we're going to keep the world the same. And frankly, the world's not good enough as it is right now. You may agree or disagree. There's cause for change. The world is changing, so literature has to change. So the avant-garde, we're always experimenting, trying to break it, make it new again. The Oulipo latched on to the idea of constraints and limits and rules to create new kinds of writing. They're very cool. Oh God, what was his name? Who did a million sonnets? It wasn't Perec. Do you know who this is? Jesus, I'm sorry. A million sonnets. He took 14 sonnets and cut them up in lines, and you can spread them around. Very cool projects. The Oulipo were very important to me. In fact, there's one English member of the Oulipo right now, and his name is Philip Terry. He is in the UK, and he's writing the introduction to my book. So I like them very much, and I'm not cool enough to be part of the Oulipo Club. They only have room for one English person anyways, so unless I kill him, I won't get in. Yeah, but they're very neat. And the point of them is to take things to an extreme. So, they have one game they play which is called N+7. So go to any poem that you like or don't like, probably better if you don't like it, and replace every noun you go to the dictionary with 7 nouns later. So kangaroo becomes kitchen. So a poem about a kitchen. Why is there a poem about a kitchen? Dorothy Livesey wrote poems about kitchens. Becomes a poem about a kangaroo, and it becomes silly and ridiculous, and that's just a way of deturning, shifting, making a poem something strange and new. Yeah. Yes, yeah, where he erases the E. In French, that's amazing. Yeah, translating it to English is actually easier, he writes a whole novel called La Dispersion that lacks the E. Yeah, Georges Perec, he's cool, funny clown guy, right? Yeah, cool. Yeah, hi. Of course you can. Just don't hit me with it.
Is it image poetry? What's the name again?
Visual poetry?
Visual poetry, yeah. Once you're inspired, let's say, by a poem, how do you start? What's your first step?
That's a great question. I'm doing a workshop for the Quebec Writers Federation tomorrow called How to Start a Poem. But it's different for visual poetry. You're absolutely right. Are you familiar with visual poetry? Have you seen this anywhere? You've seen it in advertising, haven't you? Right, where they use letters to make shapes and patterns. The advertisers are way ahead of the poets on this one. But the visual poetry movement comes from the basic fact that letters are a material thing on the page, right? Ink on a page, it's a thing, it's an object. It has a visual space that it occupies. And so you can either ignore that, which is what most writers do, what the poem actually looks like. And most poems look like, pretty generic, hugging the left margin and maybe scattering the right margin. But they look like pretty standardized things. They don't attend to the visual aspect of the poem, of the letter and the language. So around, 1889, Stéphane Mallarmé published Un coup de dés. Beautiful poem, but it was a throw of the dice that zigzags from one side to the other side, back and forth, the way a dice would move back and forth when it's thrown. So for him, his visual element was called forth by the content of the poem. He wanted to talk about chance. So he talked about a throw of the dice, and the poem echoed the throw of the dice. Simple. It was followed by a man named Guillaume Apollinaire, also in Paris, who produced a series of calligrams. And these calligrams make pictures of their poems about things, and they make a picture of what that thing is. So he did one about the Eiffel Tower. That's sort of one of the famous ones. And it looks like the Eiffel Tower. No surprises there. After that, you get into an interesting shift that opens up the fields. It's not just pictorial anymore. And this comes with the emergence of transnational capitalism. I said it, the C word. Where all of a sudden there was an international, transnational visual culture established by logos and advertising. And artists said, wait a second, how come there's a transnational, international culture for corporate interests, but there's none for cultural interests? And so it was actually a group called the Noigandries group down in Brazil, Augusto de Campos and Geraldo de Campos, who said, let's create a visual work of poetry, language-based, that anybody in the world can read, in the same way that everybody in the world can read the Golden Arches, right? So they created poems that have visual impact that anybody can understand because the content is not in the language, it's in the visual presence of the letters on the page. So how do you start with that? Well, you start on the surface, right? So you always start on the surface with those. I did a whole lecture there. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to go off into the history. But yeah, how do you start? You say, what is the thing that I want to do with it? And then you start on the surface of the material presence of the letters. Play. I mean, a lot of these poems, this was my pandemic project, right? And I had to entertain my kids. So it had to look good enough that the kids went, oh, that's cool, Dad. And I was the cool dad for a little bit. And if you look at this one, it looks like a spiral, right? Spiral effect. But those are 4 perfect circles. But because of the coloring and the placement of the letters, it actually creates a spiral effect. So how do you start that one? Well, I knew about that visual effect from, optical illusion books, and I said, I want to see if I can pull that off in letters. There's lots of room for experimenting with that. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions, concerns, feelings? Sure, thank you.
How many books have you written?
Published or not published?
Both.
It depends on how you count them, right? Like, let me show you an example. This thing is like 6 pages. It's called a chapbook. I've done hundreds of these kind of things, and they're all like one idea. As my friend said, just stupid enough. I just got to get it to that threshold where it's just stupid enough. It's okay. I've published 11 collections of poetry. I've written 3 novels, none of which will see the light of day because they're all terrible. Still working on those ones. And I published 2 academic monograph collections and 10 edited books of experimental Canadian writing and edited 7 anthologies and I have about 5 full books of poetry that have not been published. Like all the poems that I was reading at the beginning, like the Niagara Falls one. What else did I read? The one about the elephants coming back. None of those are all from manuscripts that haven't been published yet. Yet, he says optimistically, like the world hasn't shunned me again and again and again. Sorry. The world hasn't shunned me. I'm okay. Thank you. Any other? Yeah. Here we go, and then we'll pass it back. Yeah.
Okay, so for example, that spiral thing you did. How do you decide what letter you're gonna take? Is it just like You just decided to take the letter U, or is there a reason for that?
In the poem that I read about the body, like, see if I can find the line quickly. There's a line that made me choose that one. I'm not going to be able to find this. Oh, Jesus, what am I doing? Here it is. Here the water seeps into the cells of the body, becoming one with it, porous as the letter O opened into the letter U. So those were written at the same time. I was working on those two together. These are the ones I showed my kids. These are the ones I didn't. Yeah.
What are your preferences when it comes to poem? Do you prefer visually ones or like writing ones?
Great question. What's better? What's cooler? Well, I mean, it all depends on what I'm going for, right? I mean, I like both, and they do different things. And I have a hard time saying I like a collection of visual poems better than a collection of textual poems, because they're doing such different things. I think these are very pretty, right? People have taken people confess this to me as if I should be happy with it. It's kind of funny. They'll take my book, they'll buy it for like $10. It's sold in Ireland, and then they'll cut out the pages, scan it in, print out bigger prints, and put them on in their office, and say, "See what I did with your poem? You wrecked my book, is what you did, and you stole my print. Congratulations." No, I love it. I love that they do that. I think there's something powerful about an image that a text will never be able to access, and vice versa, right? So they do something completely different. I don't do as much of this as I might like to do, because I'm in the middle of manuscripts that I'm trying to finish, but I keep coming back to it. And I do enjoy it. And it's nice to be able to show something to your young children that they say, cool, as opposed to another dumb poem, Dad, what are you doing? Yeah.
At what age did you start?
At what age did I start making or breaking? Making. I started making these chapbooks when I was about 8 years old. My mom has a whole collection of them that I made. I wrote all throughout high school, never intending to share any of them. I had a high school teacher who approached me at the end of grade 12 and with a big folder, and he said, "Greg, these are all the poems you wrote in high school." He had gone to all the different teachers, all the different classes, and collected all my poems, and I was a little freaked out by that. I was a little stalkerish. I didn't start publishing until after I finished undergrad. And that's when I started the public phase of writing. And I did my first reading about 3 years later, coincidentally in St. Catharines, where I live now. This is an indulgent, forgive me. I'm going to tell a story about that one. I walked in, I was all nervous. I was all, this is my first big reading, first time as a featured reader. And we walked in, and there was a table of about 14 people, all from the Canadian Authors Association, which is a national literary scene. I mean, they're all committed writers. And so that was pointed out. These are all the Canadian authors. I was like, fantastic. The Canadian Authors Association showed up. That's great. The MC gets up to the mic and says, "All right, we're about to start." The table jumped up in a panic and fled the room. They were there meeting. They had nothing to do with the reading. They were gone. Humble origins. Poetry keeps you humble, if nothing else. My children have started writing. I mean, I think writing is a very natural thing for people to do, but something scares us out of it. Maybe it's the lack of money. Maybe it's the struggle of it. It's a weird thing to do. But I see kids doing this all the time, and I watch my students. They write little poems or little jot things down. Some of them share them with me. Most of them don't. And then that sort of dries up after a certain period of time. I think the bigger question is, why do people stop? I don't know how our time's doing. I don't know. You guys, you're the ones who have to keep me honest. Yeah. But okay. Does anyone have any last questions or thoughts? Of course.
So we all enjoyed your kind of performance earlier. What is the link between visual poetry for you and the kind of the spoken poetry, spoken word kind of universe? Like,
there's a big difference between a page poem and a voice poem. So if you're talking specifically about the Letters of Love's Name one, where I sort of get lost in a little fantasy moment there, disappear for a second, those poems are written as notation for performance. It's intended to be performed. A page poem has more visual effects. So like these poems I couldn't read, right? I mean, they used to try to do this back in the 70s, like Roule de Gay. Anybody from Quebec, from Montreal? He would take that and he'd stand on stage for half an hour singing that one. Sorry. But I keep my page separate. And what is the difference? The difference is in the stress and the focus. So for me, what's important about this one is not the pronunciation of the letter U, right? It's the shapes and the patterns a U can be used to make. I think it'd be cool if somebody read it, and I'd, love that, but that's not what the interest is for me in that particular kind of piece. It's cool.
We're privileged to have the source for this poem here, which adds so much to it. From reading the Body of the River poem, once you know that line and you see these, it expands out. So how do you kind of navigate that when you've got poems that link to other poems, but yet some are published and others aren't published? When you are trying to do literary criticism, when you're trying to find the meaning of these poems.
Well, that ain't my problem, is it now, Mark? He's wondering. So this poem, is actually kind of visually represents the whirlpool in Niagara. There's the big waterfall that everyone knows, and if you go downriver a little bit, there's a giant whirlpool, which is where Jane Urquhart's book. We were looking at Tony Urquhart stuff earlier. Jane Urquhart wrote a book called The Whirlpool. So this is like one of the later poems in the body section. Actually, it gets caught in a whirlpool, so these are definitely part of my thinking at that time. From a scholar's point of view, so this book got reviewed a number of times, and nobody knew about Niagara Falls in there. That's all something that you all have as a bonus. What's it worth? I don't know what it's worth, but that is that's sort of the story behind it. Does it need the falls or the whirlpool to make sense of this? I would say no. I would say the visual presence on the page is the poem. But when it comes to some of the other questions, like why did I choose that letter as opposed to anyone, I can tell you why I chose this font. This font is, I found this font. Do you guys do this? I was reading a book of fonts. And I found this font from 1942 called Narsen. And it was by a company in India, in New Delhi. New Delhi or Delhi? Oh, God. New Delhi. Yeah, it's New Delhi. Thank you. I feel so much better. In Delhi, during the Second World War, in 1942, they went bankrupt in 1945, so there's no way of them catching me using their font. But it was called Narsen. And Narsen, I know, is a 15th century poet. What I didn't know is this sent me back looking into him. He was famous he wrote 20,000 proverbs about how to live a good life. And they're beautiful. They're very simple little, I don't have one off the top of my head, but you can look them up. It's very cool stuff. I looked him up, and how he got his start as a poet is really interesting. And it actually set me to work on this project. The name of the font maker was Foundry. The story was that he was a domestic abuse victim, and his wife beat him and hit him and hurt him, and he was ground down. And he reached a point of despair and ran away. And he left his family behind, neglected all of his duties, just walked away. And he went into a forest. And his plan, such as it was to go into the forest and starve himself to death. He couldn't think of any other way to commit suicide, but that's what he wanted to do. He was broken. And on the 5th day, the Buddha came to him. And he said, Buddha, I'm broken. He said, you're not broken. He said, I am broken. Look at my life. It's shambles. Everything's miserable. Buddha said, it's not broken. All of your broken pieces are the path to your becoming, the path to you becoming who you are. And so he took that moment, took that inspiration, and came back and became a poet. Probably to his family's chagrin, but he became a poet and established himself as the great Indian poet of the 15th century. But his point was brokenness is how you make something new. So I broke the font and turned it into new things. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gregory. Thanks for a great, really interesting topic. Merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone. And good luck for tomorrow in Montreal.
In Montreal, yeah. How to start a poem tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
There's a couple books over here for sale. They're usually $30, but if you want them for $10, I'm just kind of just getting rid of them because I don't want to carry them anymore. It's okay? That was great. Thank you.
I was worried someone was going to come and say,